Hello, welcome back. Now, teachers' protests in Brazil have resulted in violent clashes with police. More than 10,000 people were marching peacefully in the city centre in Rio when the protest was hijacked by a small but very violent group of masked men. Fire bombs were thrown at public buildings and a car exploded. Well, Anne-Marie Tomchak is in the world's newsroom with the BBC Brazil team, and they were extraordinary pictures, weren't they, Anne-Marie?
They were, John, very violent scenes. What started out, as you said, as peaceful demonstrations turned into what can only be described as chaos. And it's still not really clear exactly what happened and who this group are, but they seem to be known as the Black Bloc. And I've been talking to the BBC Brazil team here on the 5th floor where the language services work. Jefferson Puff is one of those. He's with me now. Jefferson, what is going on in Brazil?
Yeah, this is part of a cycle of protests which have actually started over 5 months ago. They started over dissatisfaction over services, for instance, health and education, infrastructure, security. But in particular, this protest that happened yesterday in Rio, it was done by teachers. Over 10,000 people took to the streets. They are teachers on strikes. And by the end of it was peaceful. By the end of the protest, this group with black masks on, they arrived and they started to break like bank branches and everything. It is believed that they belong to the Black Blocs.
You've been speaking to one of the activists over in Rio today. Mm-hmm. What did he tell you?
Well, he described a little bit of the scenes of how it turned violent towards the end. And he's a 27-year-old video producer and activist. He mm-hmm. sent us some of his perspective on it.
So you did a short interview with him, and he sent us some of his footage that he took during those demonstrations, and we've got a clip that we can play for you now.
I think the Black Blocs in Rio are different from the rest of the world, because the social disparities here in Brazil are bigger than anywhere else. So I think this gives a different approach by the Black Bloc. You have people who studied in university, also you have homeless people, there's all kinds of people in the Black Bloc. And I think the ones that didn't have the political background to be a Black Bloc, they're now getting in touch with people who are politically active. So they're getting some political knowledge, and I think that's changing. You can see the Black Bloc is now a bigger group than they were 5 months ago.
So that was Rafael Pueter there, an activist in Rio de Janeiro, talking to Jeff earlier today. What more do you understand about this Black Bloc after talking to Rafael?
Yeah, well, we came to a little bit of a better understanding of who these people are and what they want. They're basically, there's no central leadership. It's basically an ideology, an anarchist ideology. They've been behind the protests in Seattle in the 90s against the WTO, recently in Greece as well. Basically, they will, kind of hijack protests, which are happening in a country. They will become violent towards the end. So it's pretty much, hard to control, it's hard to predict, but it definitely brings a lot of attention to whatever the cause, that they are mixed with.
Are there any expectations as to what's going to happen next?
Well, the authorities in Brazil definitely haven't been able to set a tone as to how to address this. So, it remains to be seen, what's going to take place. Some measures have been taken, but pretty much, the population and the authorities are still reacting to the streets.
Well, it definitely seems like the last thing that Brazil needs right now as it prepares for the World Cup in 8 months' time. But we'll just have to watch to see how it all unfolds and as to whether teachers can get what they're looking for. Back to you, John.
Anne-Marie, thank you very much indeed. You've got to admire the brilliance of the production team on Global. We go from a guest called Jefferson Puff to smoking.